For Eric J on Sports, I'm Eric J, and this is what I think. It's January, so that means it's the beginning of the year, and in sports, that means it's Hall of Fame time. And no, I'm not standing here talking about the fact that Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens or Sammy Sosa didn't get elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's not what this is about. What this is about is the fact that it's Hall of Fame season, so there are finalists for the Baseball Hall of Fame and the Football Hall of Fame, and then the Basketball Hall of Fame will be doing their election soon. And the problem that I have is not the fact that the all-time career leader and season leader in home runs is not in the Hall of Fame, or the guy with 7 Cy Young Awards is not in the Hall of Fame, or the guy who was the first and only player to hit 60 home runs in a season 3 different times is not in the Hall of Fame, even though he didn't lead the league in home runs either one of those 360 home run years because 2 sat him behind Mark McGwire and the other one sat him behind Bonds. That's not what this is about. What this is about is the process. And the process of becoming a Hall of Famer, particularly in baseball and basketball, is flawed. The Football Hall of Fame process is probably flawed too, but right now we're talking about baseball and basketball. The Baseball Hall of Fame process basically states that you have to be nominated. You finish playing baseball, it's 5 years later, and you get on the ballot. And that's fine. If you've already been on the ballot, you need to have received 5% of the vote to stay on the ballot. So that means that if you were on the ballot the year before and nobody cared, then you're not back on the ballot. Now, I've heard it said some years ago from an analyst on the radio, and he was talking about Hall of Fame, but he made the reference also to being in the All-Star game, that if when discussing a person's candidacy for an honor like that, if you pause even the slightest bit before you answer, then you don't feel that that person is deserving of the honor, whether it's an all-star game or the Hall of Fame. Like this year with football, if somebody says, does Derek Carr, the Raiders quarterback, who threw for 4,800 yards but only 23 touchdowns, and his team's record was 9-8, does Derek Carr deserve to be in the Pro Bowl? If you go, well, then you don't think he does. You don't believe that Derek Carr was one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the AFC, even though he was 5th in the league in passing yards. You don't believe that he was one of the 3 best quarterbacks in his conference to deserve a spot in the Pro Bowl. So if when asked, does Derek Carr belong in the Pro Bowl? If you say, sure, absolutely, then you believe that he does. And it's the same with the Hall of Fame. If you don't think that a person belongs in the Hall of Fame when they ask you initially, then you probably don't believe it. And so now the process of electing Hall of Famers in baseball is one where you end up on the ballot, and as long as you can keep getting 5% of the vote, you stay on the ballot. And you can stay on the ballot for 10 years. And that's a rule that was recently changed in 2014 because the people who control the Baseball Hall of Fame wanted to make sure that Mark McGwire, who was coming up on his 10th ballot, could not get into the Hall of Fame because his vote numbers were growing and they didn't want him to get enough votes to qualify in years 11 through 15 because people were keeping him out because of allegations of steroids. And they knew that a few years after that, that Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and Sammy Sosa, who have all also been alleged to have been connected to steroids, were going to be on the ballot. And the people who controlled the Hall of Fame didn't want them to have too many opportunities to get in because they knew or they felt that over time these guys would get in. But the process of getting into the Baseball Hall of Fame is one where you get on the ballot and then you have to get 75% of the vote. And as I said, you need 5% just to stay on the ballot. And you have 10 years of voting to try to get in. But there are 397 Hall of Fame voters, which means you need to get 297 votes to get 75% to get into the Hall of Fame. So if you are Scott Rowland, or you are Todd Helton, or you are John Smoltz, or you're some of these people, and the baseball writers who vote for the Hall of Fame look at the entirety of your career, and 297 or 300 of the 400 voters look at the entirety of your career, and they don't believe that you were a Hall of Famer, then you're not getting in. Now, here's the funny part about Baseball Hall of Fame voting. Each Hall of Fame voter is allowed to select 10 names. 10 names. So you have a ballot, and you can punch 10 names out of the however many are on your ballot and say, these are the 10 people that I want to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, a few years ago, Mariano Rivera was elected unanimously. He was selected on all 397 ballots. And I wrote a piece about that because it was the first time that this had ever happened in the history of Hall of Fame voting, which means that Rickey Henderson, the all-time career leader in leadoff home runs and walks at the time and stolen bases and runs scored, didn't get all of the votes. Nolan Ryan, the career leader in strikeouts, didn't get every vote. Tom Seaver didn't get every vote. Derek Jeter didn't get every vote. There were a lot of players. Ken Griffey Jr. There were some people who actually did not vote for Ken Griffey Jr. for the Hall of Fame. There were a lot of players who were undoubtedly Hall of Famers. But these people did not get 100% of the vote until Mariano Rivera did it a few years back. And it's because even though you can pick 10 names, there are some writers who will look at their ballot and they will say, oh, well, Rickey Henderson's going to get into the Hall of Fame anyway. So I'm not going to give him my vote because I'm going to give it to somebody else to try to give somebody else a chance to get into the Hall of Fame. Now, the problem with that is the fact that if you are giving your vote to somebody else and taking it away from Rickey or Nolan or Seaver or Jeter, then that person that you're trying to help get into the Hall of Fame probably doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame because it's not the Hall of the Very Good, or it's not the Hall of My Favorite Player. It's the Hall of Fame. It's supposed to be the best of the best, the elite of the elite, the greatest to ever have played the game. So if you're taking a vote away from a Nolan Ryan or a Rickey Henderson or a Derek Jeter to try to help someone else, Cal Ripken Jr. is losing a vote to try to help somebody else, then that somebody else probably doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But what's weird is not the baseball process. The basketball process is even weirder because you, as a player, finish your career and you've waited the requisite 5 years, now 4 years, and now you're not on the ballot. You're up for consideration for the Hall of Fame. And you face a 9-person steering committee, and someone on that steering committee, when your name is called, has to say, yes, I believe that individual X belongs on the ballot. I believe that Kobe Bryant belongs on the ballot. I believe that Shaquille O'Neal belongs on the ballot. I believe that Tim Duncan belongs on the ballot. I believe that Michael Jordan belongs on the ballot. Then you have to go through a second committee as they evaluate your career and your character to determine if you deserve to be a finalist. And then once you're a finalist, you have to get 75% of the vote. But it's not like baseball where there are 400 voters. There are only 24 voters, which means that of 24 voters, you only have to get 18 votes. So you don't have to please as many people as Derek Jeter or Rickey Henderson. You only have to please 18 people. And there are still some people who are in the Hall of Fame who did not get in the Hall of Fame the first time. Guys like Reggie Miller, who got in on his second vote. In the first year of his eligibility, there weren't 18 people who felt like he belonged in the Hall of Fame. The all-time career leader in three-point shots made. played 18 years with the Indiana Pacers, took his team to the finals, was a multi-time All-Star. There are people who did not believe that he belonged in the Hall of Fame. But a year later, they changed their minds and felt like, oh yeah, Reggie Miller deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. But the problem is there are some voters for Halls of Fame, whether it's football, baseball, or basketball, who do not believe that anybody deserves to get into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. And they also believe that no one should be unanimous for getting into the Hall of Fame. It's like when Shaquille O'Neal won the MVP award and he was almost unanimous, but CNN's Fred Hickman decided Shaq should not be unanimous and Allen Iverson deserved a single first place vote for the Most Valuable Player award. And that's nice in theory, but if Shaq was the most valuable player of the league, seemingly you would think that everyone would think so. But in this instance, Reggie Miller did not get elected to the Hall of Fame on his first ballot. He got elected on the second. So there were people who saw Reggie Miller, looked at his name, looked at his career, and went, well, and he didn't get in. But in basketball, the reason the process is broken is because, unlike baseball, there is no time limit. You can be eligible for as long as you are eligible. Bill Laimbeer has been eligible ever since the year 2000. And there are players like Dick Van Arsdale who've been eligible since the 70s because you can stay on the ballot forever. But the difference with basketball is if you pass through the first two checkpoints and you get to be a finalist, if you're a finalist 5 years in a row and you are not elected into the Hall of Fame during those 5 years, you are suspended from being a finalist for the next 5 years. Which means that if Reggie Miller had been a finalist for 5 straight years and not gotten in, for the next 5 years he couldn't even be a finalist. Which means while he might have gotten in year 6, he's now not getting in until year 11 because he didn't get in years 1 through 5. The system, the process is broken. In football, in their Hall of Fame voting, there are people who don't believe that specialists deserve to be in. So a guy who was the career leader in punting yards or punting average or net punting because he was only a punter shouldn't get in. Or a guy who was a kick returner and a punt returner but scored 20 touchdowns like Devin Hester probably shouldn't be in because he was only a kick returner. Or a guy who is the career leader in points scored because he made more field goals and extra points than anybody else probably shouldn't get in because he's only a kicker. You can't be a Hall of Fame long snapper. Kevin Green almost didn't get in because he was just a pass rusher and didn't play a lot on running downs. A guy like Lester Hayes, who holds the record for interceptions in a season, is not in the Hall of Fame because he was a specialist. He wasn't much of a run stopper. He only played pass coverage. He didn't do a lot of blitzing and sacking the quarterback. He just covered receivers and held receivers without a catch through entire games. But that's not enough because he didn't tackle Earl Campbell or sack Troy Aikman or Joe Montana or Joe Theismann. So he was a specialist. So he can't get in. So the process is broken. So what's the solution? The solution is not giving fans the vote for the Hall of Fame because fan voting is also flawed because that makes it a popularity contest. Fan voting elects Magic Johnson into the 1992 NBA All-Star game when, before the 91-92 season, Magic Johnson retired from basketball and did not play that entire season. But he was elected with the most votes that any player received for the 1992 All-Star game. And he started in place of a player who had actually played the first half of that season. And what made it worse was he won the Most Valuable Player award. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a Lakers fan and Magic Johnson was my favorite player. But he didn't play that year. But he still got elected to the All-Star game. So fan vote is not the solution. The solution might be to just revamp the process and tell people to truly vote. But how are you going to enforce that? You can't say to people, if you believe that Reggie Miller's a Hall of Famer, vote him in on the first ballot. And if you don't get in on the first ballot, you don't get in. You can't say to people, if you believe Rickey Henderson's a Hall of Famer, vote for him. Don't vote for Joe second baseman because you feel like he deserves a shot. He needs one extra vote to maybe stay on the ballot. And Rickey's already going to be in the Hall of Fame anyway, so he doesn't need all of the votes. You can't enforce that because you can't regulate how people think and feel. So maybe there is no fix to Hall of Fame voting. And that's fine. Because people like to say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it is broken. But since you can't fix it, then you tolerate what's going on and you be mad about it. You get upset about it and you make videos like this one and you speak out about it. And maybe someday during our lifetimes, someone will come up with a solution that actually repairs this issue. Remember to like and share this video and subscribe to this channel. And follow me on Facebook at Eric J on Sports 1 and on Instagram and Twitter at Eric J on Sports. And for Eric J on Sports, I'm Eric J, and this is what I think.